So it's been a while since we last spoke. Hello, my name is Anna, in case we need to be introduced. It's been an insanely long time and this feels very awkward. Was it always this awkward? Maybe. So hello, what's happened in my absence? I sort of fell off the face of the earth on Booktube mid-February, and there's a multitude of reasons for that, all of which are far too personal to get into in this video. So I took a little bit of a break because I needed it, and I guess I just always assumed that I would come back, and then I just kept not coming back. And I was still reading, and I kept assuming that I would come back, because usually what I do, obviously when I was in the habit of making videos and monthly wrap-up, is when I finished a book I would sort of put it to the side. I wouldn't put it away on my shelf because I was like, oh, I have to talk about that, I have to review that. And gradually over the last few months my floor has just been collecting all of the books that I've been reading, and they've not been going on my shelves because I think some part of my brain was like, you're gonna sit down and need to review these at some point. These are all the books that you haven't reviewed yet. And I guess it just got to the point where there's not any room on my floor anymore. So I'm back and I'm gonna review all the books from my floor, all 23 books that I've read in my massive absence. And that's probably not like a very good reason to come back, because I had a lot of thoughts while I was away about like why I was even on Booktube. Am I bringing anything to the community? Is the community giving anything back to me? Like, what am I getting out of it? What purpose does it serve? All of these like philosophical thoughts I was having. And so I should probably do another video about that at some point. But yeah, I was having all of these thoughts about Booktube, and it just got to the point where I've just bitten the bullet and said there's not enough space on my floor anymore, so I've got to come back, I guess. So I hope you'll have me. I don't really know what my content is going to be going forward. I've got 2 videos planned, a grand 2 videos, and the first one is this one where I talk about all the books that I read in my absence, and the second one is going to be all the books that I bought in my absence. And then after that I think I'm going to do a complete rejig of my content and what this channel's going to be, and you'll probably hear about that if you want to stick around. And also, before we get onto the books, I know, like the longest intro ever, fucking hell, another small exciting thing that happened in my long absence that I like didn't get a chance to celebrate because I wasn't making videos. I hit 1k, which is insane. I made this channel about 7 years ago now, in 2014, so it's going to be 8 years ago when we hit October, and I'd always just made my peace with the fact that I was never going to be a big booktuber. I'm still not a big booktuber. 1k is not like a big booktuber. I remember coming back to booktube in lockdown and seeing people make channels in lockdown, and they were just like soaring. They were hitting like 1k within like a month, and I was like, okay, that's just not going to be me. You know, I'm happy with my small little corner of the internet, but it's kind of crazy that now there's 1k people that have subscribed. Not 1k watching, but that's fine, but 1k have subscribed, and that's insane to me that 1,000 people have seen my face at some point and then clicked subscribe. So yeah, if you're one of those people who subscribed, thank you. If you're one of those people who are still watching after my absence, thank you, you're incredible. And I'm going to stop waffling at you now and start talking about some books. So we're casting our minds back all the way to February of 2022. And as I've covered extensively before on the channel, my memory is shite. So this is going to be a really interesting experiment to see how much I can remember about these books that I read only mere months ago. But when you get out of the habit of doing monthly wrap-ups, the information just goes, so we'll see. One that did stick in my brain though was Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter, which I read right at the beginning of February because that was our Briarrose Book Club pick. And I don't need to say too much about this because me and B did a whole hour and a half long discussion about it. It's incredible, it's lyrical, it's beautiful, everything we've come to know and love about Angela Carter's style is in this book. We're following Fevers, who is a beguiling, sort of half-human, half-bird woman with wings, winged woman, who makes her home in the circus, and it's about a journalist who finally tracks her down and wants to answer the fundamental question of, is she fact or is she fiction? Is she real or is she just like a trick of the light, a trick of the circus? The book is split up into 3 sections, I believe, and definitely the first part was the strongest for me. I didn't so much vibe with the ending. It gets quite confusing towards the end with the various imagery and the various plot threads that have splintered and trying to bring them all back together. And even though I didn't like the ending, I still would recommend it for any fans of the fairy tale, of the mystique, of Angela Carter, of the Gothic and fairy tales and all of those wonderful things that she's inspired by. So this is definitely one that I would recommend readily. I think Angela Carter's Bloody Chamber is my favourite of all time. Nothing can top that, but because of how much I love this, I'm so excited to keep making my way through her back catalogue. And the next 2 books I read in February were for a romance reading vlog, and that was Take a Hint, Dani Brown, and Act Your Age, Eve Brown, which are books 2 and 3 in the Brown Sister trilogy, and I did a whole reading vlog on these, so again, I don't need to talk too much about my in-depth thoughts because that's already covered. Look at me go. And yeah, these are just such fun, wonderful, wholesome books. I say wholesome, they're quite explicit in terms of the sex scenes in them, but I love any book about sisters, any book about family, so this whole trilogy has just been so much fun to read, so light and so breezy, and definitely what I needed. And the next book I read in February, I already have a reading vlog on, so again, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but this was Trans Wizard Harriet Porber and the Bad Boy Parasaurolophus by Chuck Tingle, who is infamous for writing bizarre and meanie erotica novels, and I have a whole like 26-minute video dissecting this, so if you're interested in Chuck Tingle at all, I will direct you to my reading vlog in the description. And now we get on to the books that I read in March, which have not been covered at all on my channel, so I have to just remember and not redirect you to any other videos, so let's have a look at what I was reading. So Love and Colour by Bolo Babalola was our February pick for Briar's Book Club, and I believe I finished it within like the first few days of March, so that's why it wasn't read in February. But these are short stories from around the world, inspired by different fairy tales from around the world. So we have stories inspired by Scheherazade and Psyche and Nefertiti and Thisbe, these sort of like famous figures, and then sort of lesser known like fairy tale figures as well, like Xenu and Atem and Osun, which were really, really interesting to read, and we went through in our like Briar's Book Club live discussion each story individually and about their themes and about what the inspirations for those stories were. So if you're interested in this in like a detailed way, if you've already read it or you're like not sure about it, I can redirect you to our discussion. And another one of my March reads was Slug by Holly McNish, and I absolutely adored this. It's a sort of mix of poetry and essays and like personal stories, and it is just so wonderful and on so many different themes, but I guess the main theme would be sort of feminism and class and society and family and friendships. There are just so many ideas packed in here and so many poems, and Holly McNish really fights against like the elitism of poetry. So there are several poems where she has like a little paragraph at the beginning where she like explains the ideas and inspirations behind them, because she doesn't want poetry to sort of be held aloft on this pedestal. She like wants it to be like a conversation, and a lot of her language can be quite colloquial and quite funny, and I think humour is obviously a really fun way to access poetry, and makes it really sort of like readable and enjoyable, and you want to keep going back to it. But then there are also some really hard-hitting poems in here about Holly McNish like losing her grandmother, and also the difference between sort of her grandmother's girlhood and experience of femininity, and then Holly's experience of femininity and being a young woman, and how that generational gap, you know, plays out, and how sad that is, like how far we've come, but also how sexism still plays a part in our society, and has done for obviously decades. And I kept note in my notes app on my phone of like how many poems that I like wanted to come back to and read again, and it just got so long. This book is like 500 pages long, so by the time that I got to the end of it there were like so many poems that I wanted to go back to. So I think that's a good sign. I definitely would really recommend this if one, you already like poetry, but two, you're looking for like a way to get into poetry. This is a really good one because it covers so many different topics, and it's so funny and you're going to want to share these poems with like friends or family. I kept like screenshotting certain poems and like sending them to friends being like, this made me think of you, this made me think of you. So yeah, definitely really recommend this one, and I can't wait to get back to it someday soon. Another book I read in March was Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death by Selena Godden, and this was a sort of lyrical stream of consciousness style book about death as the figure, and about a man who encounters death via a writing desk. I didn't entirely get on with this one. I think I gave it 2 out of 5, and I wrote a review of it on Goodreads, which I don't often do, but I wanted to sort of justify why it didn't work for me, and I now, for the life of me, cannot remember what I said. Is my phone anywhere? Can I check what I said? This is going to be so underwhelming. I'm going to like search for this review and it's going to be like, shit. Right, so here's what I said. Upon finishing, I was going to give it 3 stars because I wanted to give this book the benefit of the doubt and assumed I was just too dumb for some of the experimental prose. But no, I want to give myself some credit for once. I like experimental novels, dense novels, poetry. There was nothing about the form of this or the base language that was too complex. It just didn't work for me on an emotional level. We follow Wolf, who has been touched by death since his mother perished in a fire at age 9 and his dad disappeared, later drowning. Wolf buys an antique writing desk that once belonged to Mrs. Death, and this is the object that links them, and through this they can communicate and he begins to transcribe their conversations. Some of these are in the form of script, some prose, and there are some stream of consciousness / poetry interludes as well. I'll admit I did not get the benefit of this choppy style. It helped me breeze through the book quicker, which was welcome, but apart from that it gave me no more insight into each character. The observations and discoveries made through the interviews are so derivative. Death gives us purpose, love is the reason for living. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but I might as well not be, because that's the only real takeaway I got after 300 pages, a message I've received from every weepy rom-com and inspirational Instagram quote. So why did I need to sit through this book? I did enjoy the glimpses into some parts of history and some deaths of some notorious historical figures, and also those who brought death. Jack the Ripper and Myra Hindley are mentioned, which I thought was interesting. How does Mrs. Death deal with those who have taken her role into their own hands? This question was skirted around, and the mention of these infamous figures was much too brief to have the impact that invoking such a notorious figure should have. Throughout the novel, there is also mention of those who have lost their lives to injustice and racism, and Godden specifically mentions Grenfell and Windrush in her note at the end. These moments were powerful on the language level, but again fail to elicit any real impact on the rest of the novel. They are simply fragments of a larger picture that never comes together, but are too fleeting to stand on their own. So yeah, I think that sums it up. Clearly this didn't work for me, and we can move on. And the next book I read in March was Galate by Madeline Miller, and come on, it's tiny. For the life of me, I cannot tell you. I remember I enjoyed it. It was well written. It's Madeline Miller. Like, what else do you want from me? It's good. God, and next we got on to April, and look, I don't even know what happened in April, but I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books, and do I remember any of them? I don't know. So I read the Penelope Abbey Margaret Atwood because this was a Briar Rose book club book, and then we promptly fell off of Briar Rose book club and we haven't done our discussion yet for this one. It's incoming, it's in the offing. Just keep an eye on our Twitter, as always, even though it's been dusty and dead for months. We will get around to this. We missed the book club. It will come back. Just have to be patient. And next up I read The Appeal, which like everyone else on Booktube I finished within like a matter of, I think a day. I think I read it in literally hours. I don't know what else I can say that hasn't already been said. We basically follow this murder mystery through just emails and text. So the format is that a lawyer sends all of the documents to like 2 students, and the 2 students are sifting through everything and are trying to work out if the defendant is guilty or not, and then they come to their different conclusions and pose their theories at the end, and then like you find out the truth. And it's just very gripping. It's one of those books that I don't think I'll need to read again, so it kind of feels like, oh, I breezed through that so quickly and now it's just gonna be on my shelf forever, and I don't know if I'll ever need to read it again because I know what happens. But it was a decent book. It had me gripped, so have to give it props. And next I read My Friend Anna by Rachel Loach Williams, which is based on the infamous story of Anna Delvey, who is that fake heiress. There's now a whole Netflix series on her. So she's this woman who just like lied about who she was and having money and scammed a bunch of people. And this book is written by one of her friends who like got scammed, and I read it very quickly. Again, it's one of those that's like very readable, kind of journalistic style, conversational, and the story is so insane that you just want to keep reading. But after I finished, I kind of realised that like it's a bit of a biased point of view, and I think Rachel wants to kind of absolve herself of like any responsibility. It doesn't acknowledge kind of her role in what happened and like the privilege that she has, and also what she got out of this whole experience, because now she has like an HBO deal and she's like famous and really rich, and so she's kind of playing this victim card all the way through, and I don't know if it's fully warranted. And that sounds like really dickish to say, because obviously like if something like this happened to me, I would probably play the victim card and like write a book about it too. But also, you're a privileged woman who was already working at Vanity Fair when this happened to you, and this whole thing just made you more famous and like giving you an HBO deal, so like, you know. But regardless, like I said, the story is insane and it's written well, so it kept me gripped. But again, I don't think I'll ever be needing to reach for this again. Another book I read in March was Gallant, and this was another Briar Rose Book Club pick, and this was the March pick. So we've read this at the beginning of March because that's when it came out, and then we've already done our discussion for this one, and that is already on my channel. And the language was just so stunning, so stunning. But what let it down for both me and B, I think, was that it does skew a little bit younger than we thought it would. It's a bit more middle grade-y and a bit more YA. The language was so gothic and so beautiful and atmospheric, and I really thought that it was doing something a little bit different, but then the ending was a bit more generic, sort of YA paranormal, and that was a little bit of a shame. But I still gave it a strong 4 stars. I love the language. I will buy anything that V. Schwab writes, and I cannot wait to put this on my shelf because, I mean, just look how gorgeous. I also read Booktubes' #1 darling fave, which is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, and I enjoyed it, but for me it was a 4 stars rather than a 5, which is sacrilegious, I know. And for anyone who's been living under a rock, this basically is just the definition of cozy fantasy. We're following this house in the Cerulean Sea on an island, and we're following Linus, who is like a social worker, like a magical care worker, and he travels to this house to check in on these like magical kids who are being cared for by this like mysterious wizard. And it's just very sort of sweet, wholesome, and yeah, it is. I don't know what else I can say that hasn't been said about this book. I mean, you've already heard the hype. If you think it's gonna be your thing, it's a good example of that thing, of cozy fantasy and like wholesome characters. So if that's what you're in the mood for, this might work for you. I also read No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, and this won the did it win the Man Booker or did it win the Women's Prize? It won something. It might have won both, which Patricia over here like, ooh. Definitely getting delirious. I've been talking for too long. But this I think I gave 3 stars, and I had mixed feelings on it. I thought the subject matter was really interesting. It's basically about social media and how to sort of live in the fragmented way that we do. So basically, whenever you open your phone, you know, you're being overloaded with so much stuff, and it's all sort of different. So like there'll be bad news, terrible news, bombings, really traumatic stuff, alongside people trying to advertise stuff to you, alongside like porn, or just so many different ways that you're being stimulated every time you look at a screen. And it's about how you live your life alongside that. So I guess the first section is this sort of stream of consciousness, really fragmented bits, and it really sort of tries to mirror the way that we consume social media. So like there are small paragraphs and they're on wildly different subjects. You're just like jumping around trying to piece together any kind of cohesive narrative. It's not working. And then the second half is a little bit more cohesive, where the main character has to go to hospital to care for her sister, and it's more about how the social media sort of takes a backseat and she prioritizes like the real. So it's definitely a worthy message, and social media is something that I'm very interested in reading about, because I definitely have various addictions with social media, and I definitely like want to curb that, and I want to limit the impact it has on my mental health. But I don't know if the way this book was written kept me at an emotional distance, and therefore I wasn't quite as receptive to the message as maybe I wanted to be. So yeah. And next we had my first 5-star of the year, which I was not anticipating giving 5 stars to a non-fiction book because I'm not usually a non-fiction reader. It takes a lot for me to pick up a non-fiction book. I always want to be one of those girlies who's like live, laugh, learning through my life, and, you know, like reading about important things rather than just like escapism. I think I can do both, but you know, this is like one of the first non-fiction books that I've picked up in ages, and I just fell in love with it, so I really want to be picking up more non-fiction. And it just does what it says on the tin, basically. It is conversations on love, but what I loved about it is that it's not just focusing on romantic love, it's about friendships, it's about parents, it's about siblings, it's about just people that we meet fleetingly. Those can also be love stories in lots of different ways. And there are just so many different speakers that are interviewed in this book, and they all have sort of not opposing viewpoints, but there are lots of different viewpoints represented, and it doesn't ever dictate to you what love is or what love should be. It's just people sharing their own experiences, and it invites you to sort of draw your own conclusions. And I just thought it was so interesting, and I loved like the format of it. It was very conversational, obviously to do with the title, but it was like very readable and relatable, and definitely something that I think I will be coming back to. And I really love the focus on, like I said, other forms of love, because as someone that has only had one romantic relationship, I can't really relate to, you know, people that are talking about like having lots of experiences or lots of different flings. And I really enjoyed the focus on like nurturing friendships and like having that be as important as your romantic relationships. And I have lots of friends that I've had for sort of 10 plus years, and I sort of, when I find a friend that I really like, I like cling on. So I really enjoyed that focus on like having to nurture those relationships as well as your romantic ones, and like not prioritizing romance or like thinking that as superior over like friendship. And that just was something that I'd never really seen discussed in like a non-fiction setting before, and I really appreciated it, so recommend. And the last of the March books is The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont, and this is a sort of fictionalized account of when Agatha Christie went missing. So Agatha Christie obviously is an infamous crime and mystery writer, and true to form as a mysterious mystery writer, she had a mysterious thing happen to her in her life where she went missing for like 2 to 3 days, and when she was found she couldn't really recall what had happened. And so there's been lots of speculation over the years over what happened to her and what could have possibly happened to her. This is basically a fictionalized theory about what could have happened, and it follows Agatha Christie, who's dealing with a husband who has been unfaithful to her, and the mistress of Agatha Christie's husband also has a voice in this novel. I enjoyed it, but obviously it doesn't really have a lot of basis in fact, and I think maybe I would prefer to have read some sort of non-fiction account of Agatha Christie and actually known how much of this was true. And it did sort of try to take the form of an Agatha Christie novel of like, there's a police detective who's trying to figure out what's going on, there's like some shady past, and there's like, you know, cozy sort of hotel mysteries and things like that, but it just didn't quite hit the level of an Agatha Christie, which I know is a tall order. I don't think Nina, we're on first name basis now, I don't think Nina was setting out to like write an Agatha Christie mystery, but obviously she is invoking certain elements, certain tropes, and I just didn't quite hit like the peak for me, but it was definitely like an enjoyable, cozy mystery world to be in. It just made me want to read Agatha Christie instead, basically, which, you know, is understandable. So now we're on to May, and there's a dead fucking spider on that. See, that's why I shouldn't be storing books on the floor. So one of the first books I read in May was How to Be Bad by E. Lockhart, Laura Miracle, and Sarah Milanowski. And this is, I was gonna say very old, I don't know, it's like very, I'm gonna say 2014 YA. 2006! Okay, that's not what I thought that was gonna be. Okay. So I just wanted like some sort of fun summer vibes, and I think Leanne unhauled this, so I picked it up from her a couple of months ago, and obviously got around to it when it was starting to become summer. And it was enjoyable, but again it did feel very 2006, so there are a couple of like outdated terms in here, and also just like the format is very basic, just like 3 friends going on a road trip, like defying their parents for the first time. And it just rings true of like those very early YA novels, and there's obviously been better and more interesting takes on that genre since then, but like what could I expect from like one of the first ones? So it was enjoyable, but like again, I don't see myself coming back to this at any point, but it was a good one to start off my like summer reading. And then I carried on the YA theme by reading Are We All Lemmings and Snowflakes by Holly Bourne, and it's a little bit of a detour because it's YA, but it's also set at like a sort of psychiatric unit. So our main character, Olive, is sort of struggling with OCD, I think, and intrusive thoughts and, you know, anxiety and depression and sort of mental illness. Her family are really worried about her, so they do this experimental trial where she's sent off to this sort of camp reset, it's called, for a month, and she has to sort of try and, you know, take part in the therapy, meet other people, and, like, you know, learn how to manage her symptoms. And again, I enjoyed this. I liked the frank discussion of mental illness. I liked that it wasn't romanticized, because, you know, obviously YA, there have been some issues with the romanticization of mental illness. I'm saying that as someone who heavily romanticized Looking for Alaska in 2014, and I shouldn't have learnt my lesson. I thought Holly Bourne did a really good job of portraying mental illness, like, really honestly and frankly. I do think it does have a bit of a sort of neat, wholesome ending, which I know is because you want to give people hope. You don't want to write a YA novel about mental illness that's targeted at teens, that's really dark and depressing and is like, everything sucks. But just as someone who's older, like, I just think that message, you know, wasn't for me, essentially. But I definitely did enjoy it, and I would recommend it for people that are looking for YA that is focused on mental health. Also in May, are we on May? Yes, we're on May. I read Far From the Tree by Robin Benway, and this is about 3 siblings who were all adopted by different families, and then when they're like 16, 17, one of them reaches out to the other 2, and it's about how they feel about being adopted, about the different families that they found themselves in, and about whether or not they want to go and search for their birth mother. And with any book about siblings, I just made me want siblings. It made me yearn for a sibling. My kingdom for a sibling. There are 3 perspectives in this book. It's each of the siblings, and we each hear their stories about, like, settling into their families, and one of them has had quite a rocky experience going in and out of foster homes, and the other ones have been quite privileged. So it's an interesting to see that dynamic and you know, that representation of, like, the foster system. And yeah, like I said, with any book about siblings, I just came away wanting siblings, and it was quite like a nice read. I enjoyed it. And then I finally got around to Trials of Apollo, Tyrant's Tomb, which is book 5 in this series. This is book 4. I also have book 5, and I've been trying to just gradually make my way and finish this series, because I started it what feels like years and years and years ago, and I just need to finish it and get it up on my shelf so I can have my complete Percy Jackson collection on my shelf. This was everything you expect from Rick Riordan. I think maybe I'm getting to the point where, like, I know the formula a bit too well, and I can see things coming and all of that. Obviously that makes sense. I'm a 24-year-old woman. These books are not for my target demographic, but I still enjoyed it. I still enjoyed all the, like, mythology antics and, you know, like, my favourite characters coming back and all of that good stuff. So I enjoyed myself. And finally, we're down to the books that I read in June, which, as you can see, I had, like, a bit of a boom in April where I read a shit ton, and recently my mental health has been a little bit on the nosedive. So we're back to just, like, 3 books a month, which is not where we want to be, but we can work on that. So I think the first one I read in June was Winnie the Pooh, because, like I said, my mental health was a little bit whoop, and what you want when it goes whoop is wholesome children's stories. I love Winnie the Pooh, but I realised when I bought this a while ago that I didn't actually own a physical copy, because when I was a kid my parents got a Winnie the Pooh audiobook free and a copy of The Guardian, so I used to listen to that, like, every night to help me get to sleep, and even now it brings me a lot of comfort. If I can't get to sleep, I will just stick on Winnie the Pooh and it works like a charm. But I finally wanted to, like, own a physical copy and read it in conjunction with the beautiful illustrations, and it was just chef's kiss, so good. So if you're a fan of Winnie the Pooh, I really recommend these, like, I think it's Egmont that have done these beautiful, like, hardback reissues of them. I think there's, like, 3 or 4 others that are in different colours that are different stories, but this was the first one, and it's just gorgeous. Like, what more do you need? And next up in June, I listened to Putting the Rabbit in the Hat by Brian Cox, and if you know anything about me, you'll know that I am in love with the TV show Succession, of which Brian Cox is the main attraction, is the, well, not the main, not, he is the main character, but he's not, everyone else is good in Succession, but Brian Cox is, like, the most infamous, that's not the good one. Brian Cox is a very famous actor who's had a very storied career on stage and in screen. I'm getting so delirious. Okay. Brian Cox, very famous actor, talented man, and I wanted to read his memoir because I love the show Succession, of which he is an integral part. There we go, the language has returned to me. And also Brian Cox grew up in Scotland, in Dundee, and I also grew up in Scotland, not in Dundee, but we just sort of have that connection, and he's a bit of a grumpy old man, reminds me a bit of my dad. This is a very frank memoir about Brian Cox's life growing up in poverty, and you know, his relationship with his children, his relationship with other co-stars, and things that he's regretted, things that he is most proud of. And it was like a really interesting look into the life of somebody who is a creative person, and obviously me wanting to get into film was really interesting to hear some of his like behind the scenes set stories and like different like funny anecdotes of like other actors and things like that. So I definitely want to read more memoirs and biographies of people who work in film, because that's obviously one of my key interests, and I really enjoyed reading Miriam Margolyes' memoir at the tail end of last year, so I definitely want to be doing more of that this year. And the last book I have to talk about, thank God, is Promising Young Woman by Caroline O'Donoghue, not to be confused with the Emerald Fennell film, which I love and made a whole video about. This is a very different story, it just happens to have a similar title. And this is about, what's her name? Jane, who is going through a breakup at the start of this book and is sort of feeling a bit like meh with life, like not enjoying her life, not enjoying her career, like feeling very much lost and at a crossroads and unsure of what's happening. And then once this breakup happens, she does sort of throw herself into work, and that has like positive consequences where her bosses suddenly notice her, she gets a very quick promotion, she gets sort of leveled up very quickly through the ranks, and then begins a romantic relationship with her boss, and that doesn't go very well. So it's a look at sort of feminism, modern feminism, and political sort of gender dynamics in modern workplaces. And that sounds very clinical and not interesting, but the way it's written is a lot more relatable and fresh and engaging, and Caroline O'Donoghue has fast become one of my like favourite authors. I haven't disliked anything she's written. My favourite I think so far is Scenes of a Graphic Nature, but I will literally just buy anything that she writes because her ideas and her writing style is always just so engaging, very witty, and I always like breeze through her books in like a matter of like a day or two. So very much recommend. And yeah, have I said everything that I need to say? Are we done? Are we free? Did we just talk about 23 books? Did we do it? Are we done? Okay, so I think that's everything. I have no idea what the future of the channel is going to be, so I appreciate you if you're here. You're still here. That's really nice of you. You don't have to be. I don't even know if this video is going to make it online, to be honest. We'll just have to see how it goes, but fingers crossed. And now I can finally get these books off my bloody floor and onto my shelves now that I've done the video, and oh, the relief, the relief. Thank you so much for watching this rambly mess. Don't know why you did it, don't know why you're doing it to yourself, but thank you for being here, and I will see you soon, maybe with another video soon. Maybe. Bye.